The first thing I felt when I came back was grief. Not relief, not gratitude, not the euphoria they describe in the medical literature. Grief. Pure, immediate, crushing grief. The kind you feel when something irreplaceable has been taken from you. My body felt like a cage. A wet, heavy, painful cage that someone had locked me back inside without asking. And in the first seconds of consciousness, before I knew where I was, before the nurses rushed in, before the monitors started screaming, all I could think was, I was just there. I was just there. And now I'm not. My name is Dr. Ellen Marsh. I practiced psychiatry for 23 years. I specialized in treatment-resistant depression, in the cases no one else wanted to take, the patients who had failed everything on the list. I believed in the science. I believed in the mechanisms. I believed that if we found the right molecule and the right dosage, we could fix what was broken in the brain. I believed that right up until the moment I died. If you're new here, please subscribe. This channel exists because of testimonies like mine, and there are more of them than you think. Hit subscribe so you don't miss them. And before I go any further, drop something in the comments. Tell me if you've been through something like this. Tell me if someone you love is struggling right now. Tell me your question. I read them, every single one. Now let me tell you what happened. It started with pain. That's not how these stories usually begin, I know. Most people describe a car accident, a surgery, a sudden cardiac event, something fast. Mine was slow. It had been building for weeks, a pressure in my chest that I kept attributing to stress, to overwork, to the accumulation of 23 years of carrying other people's darkness. I was a psychiatrist. I was supposed to know how to read the signs. I didn't read my own. The pain got worse on a Tuesday. I remember it was Tuesday because I had 3 back-to-back sessions that morning, and I was sitting in my car between appointments, pressing my palm against my sternum, telling myself it would pass. It didn't pass. By noon, it was radiating down my left arm. By 2 o'clock, I was on the floor of my office. By the time the paramedics arrived, my heart had been in a fatal arrhythmia for long enough that the lead cardiologist would later tell me, very quietly, that what happened next was, statistically, not supposed to happen. And then the pain stopped. That's the thing no one tells you. Not in the studies, not in the case reports, not in the clinical literature I had read and cited and taught for 2 decades. One moment the pain was everything. It was the entire universe. It was all I was. And then it simply wasn't there. Not faded, not dulled, gone. Completely and instantly gone, the way a sound disappears when you turn off the source. And in that silence, in that sudden and total absence of everything that had hurt, I became aware that I was somewhere else. I was standing in a field. That's the only word I have for it, and I know it's inadequate. It was like a field the way a single candle flame is like the sun. The proportions were familiar. Open sky, ground beneath my feet, something like grass, something like light, but the scale of it was impossible. It didn't have edges. It didn't have a horizon. It extended in every direction with the same clarity, the same detail, the same presence, and somehow it was all equally close. I could see individual blades of what I'll call grass, the way you can see something held in your hand, and I could see the entirety of what I'll call sky, the way you see something enormous and far away. And both of these things were happening simultaneously, without contradiction, without strain. My eyes, if I had eyes, were not choosing between near and far. They were holding everything at once. They were figures, I don't know how many. Not a crowd, not a multitude, just a presence, a warmth that had shape. They were the way you recognize someone you love from a distance before you can see their face. You don't need the details. The knowing arrives before the evidence. I understood that these figures had once been people the way I was a person. I understood that they had passed through something I was passing through now, and I understood that they were not surprised to see me. And then there was light. I've tried 100 times to describe it. I've sat with this for years now, since I came back, turning it over in my mind the way you turn a word over looking for the right definition, and I cannot get there in language. It was not a color. It was not a brightness. It was presence. Concentrated presence. The feeling of being known completely. The feeling of being seen all the way down to the parts of yourself you've hidden from everyone, including yourself. And instead of the shame you expected, instead of the judgment you braced for, there was only recognition. I was being recognized. And something in me that had been clenched for decades, something I hadn't even known was clenched, released. That was when I understood who was there. I will not be coy about this. I will not soften it or qualify it or frame it as a metaphor for something psychologically explicable. I was in the presence of Jesus. Not a figure from a painting, not the iconography I half remembered from a childhood I had mostly abandoned, not a symbol or a projection or a manifestation of my unconscious longing. Him. And I knew it the way you know the sun is the sun, not because someone told you, not because you looked it up, but because there is no other thing it could possibly be. He spoke to me. Or something happened that I experience in memory as speech, as words, as meaning delivered directly, though I cannot swear that there was sound in any physical sense. What I can tell you is what I understood. What I can tell you is what he showed me. And what he showed me is the reason I came back. He showed me the people I worked with, not their files, not their diagnoses, not the neat clinical frameworks I had built around them across 23 years. He showed me them, the actual interior of them, the part that exists below the symptoms and the history and the presenting complaint. And what I saw was not what I had been treating. Let me be precise about this because precision matters here. I had spent 23 years treating the brain. Neurotransmitters, receptor sites, uptake inhibition, the elegant pharmacological cascade that begins when an SSRI molecule binds to its target. I understood this system, I believed in this system, and it was real. The pharmacology is real, the mechanisms are real, the measurable symptomatic relief is real. I'm not here to tell you that the science is wrong, but what he showed me was the part the science cannot see. There is something in the people I treated, something in the people who come through a psychiatric door, medicated and unmedicated, treated and untreated, hopeful and despairing, that is not a receptor, it is not a molecule. It is not a deficit of serotonin or dopamine or anything measurable on any instrument we currently possess. It is the part that is trying to survive on its own, that has been trying to survive on its own for so long it has forgotten there is another way. It is the striving, the relentless, exhausted, white-knuckled striving to manage the pain from the inside, by force of will, by chemistry, by whatever tools the person has been handed. And he showed me who would not make it, not because they were bad, not because they were weak, not because they had failed the treatment. Often, it was because the treatment had failed them in a way none of us had the framework to acknowledge. He showed me the ones who had been handed a pill and told, "This is what you need." And they took it. And it helped. A little. Enough to keep going. But the thing underneath, the wound underneath, the fundamental aloneness underneath, that stayed. And the medication became the ceiling. The medication became the thing that made the unbearable barely bearable, and barely bearable became the life. He did not say antidepressants are wrong. I need you to hear that. He did not tell me to throw away the prescription pad. What he showed me was something more specific and more devastating than a simple condemnation. He showed me the ones who were slowly disappearing inside the barely bearable. The ones for whom the medication had become not a bridge but a floor, and a low floor. He showed me what that slow disappearance looks like from outside the body, from outside time, from a perspective that could see the whole arc of a life, and I could not look at it without weeping. Because I recognized them. I had sent them home. I had refilled those prescriptions. I had documented their progress in the language of symptom reduction, while the thing that needed to be reached had never been reached at all. I came back to this body, to this heavy, painful, grief-weighted body. And the grief was not just for the place I was leaving, it was for the patients. It was the grief of knowing something that I had not known before, something that had arrived fully formed and unrequested, something I could not unknow. The ones he showed me who would not survive. They were not the ones with the most severe diagnoses. They were not the ones with the worst histories or the most complex presentations or the longest lists of failed medications. They were the ones who had stopped believing that what they were carrying could ever be seen by another person. The ones who had settled into invisibility. The ones who had accepted that being managed was the same as being helped, because they had been managed long enough that they could no longer distinguish between the two. They were the ones no one was asking the right question. Let me tell you about a patient I saw after I came back. I will not use her name. I will tell you that she had been in treatment for 11 years when she first sat in my office, post-NDE, 8 months after I had returned to practice. She was 44. She had tried 6 different antidepressants, 3 of which had given her meaningful but partial relief. She was, by any clinical standard, a treatment success. She was functional. She was employed. She was alive. She told me she was fine. She used the word fine exactly the way every person uses it when they are not fine and have stopped expecting anyone to notice. I sat with her for a long time. I did not look at her file. I looked at her. And I asked her the question he had shown me to ask. Not a clinical question, not a screening tool or a validated instrument or a structured interview protocol. I asked her, "When was the last time you told someone the true thing?" She stared at me. 11 years of therapy and no one had asked her that question. 11 years of sessions and symptom ratings and medication adjustments, and no one had asked her the true thing. She started crying. Not the controlled, careful crying of someone who has learned to be a good patient. She cried the way people cry when they've been holding something for 11 years, and someone has finally found the exact place where it was being held. That was the beginning. Not the end, just the beginning. But beginnings are what the barely surviving desperately need, and they are exactly what a system built on symptom management so rarely provides. I have told this story in waiting rooms and conference halls and hospice chapels and backyards. I have told it to colleagues who received it skeptically and to grieving parents who received it like water. I have told it to a man in his 50s who came up to me after a talk and said, very quietly, that his son had been on medication for 7 years and hadn't smiled in 3, and he didn't know what to do with that. I have watched this story land in people like a stone landing in still water, and I have watched the rings spread outward. That is the block. That is what he showed me this testimony was for. Not for me, not so I could write a book or give a talk or update my clinical approach, though all of those things have happened. It was for the woman crying in the chair. It was for the man with the quiet voice and the son who hadn't smiled. It was for whoever is watching this right now and has been living in barely bearable long enough to forget it wasn't always like this, because this is what he told me about the mental health crisis. Not a statistic, not a policy prescription, not a clinical framework. He told me that the crisis is not the diagnoses. The crisis is the invisibility. The crisis is the number of people who are technically being treated and functionally being unseen, who have been handed the tools for symptom management and told, without words, just by omission, just by the shape of the system, that symptom management is the best that can be hoped for. Those are the ones who will not survive, not the ones who can't be helped, the ones who have been made to believe they cannot be reached. I was one of the people making them believe that. I did not know it. I was doing my best. My best was not enough, and he was not condemning me for it. He was showing me, with the specificity and the gentleness that only comes from being completely known and completely loved simultaneously, exactly where I had fallen short and exactly why it mattered. I came back to this body. I live in it now. It is heavier than the other place, and it hurts, and it will not last. I know that more concretely than most people do. I am not afraid of it ending. That is what the return gave me. Not the grief it started with, but underneath the grief, something unshakable. A knowledge that what I saw is real. A knowledge that who I was with is real. And a responsibility to say so, as clearly and as many times as it takes. I still prescribe medication. I want to be honest with you about that. I am not a different kind of psychiatrist now in every practical sense. I still sit across from people in pain, and I still reach into the pharmacological toolkit, and I still try to relieve suffering with the tools I have. But I ask different questions now. I ask the true thing question. I ask, when is the last time you felt genuinely seen by another person? I ask, is there something underneath the depression that has never been said out loud? And when they look at me with that careful, practiced, "Have you done this before?" look, I tell them where these questions come from. I tell them what I saw, and then I wait, because that is the other thing the return taught me. The striving self cannot wait. The surrendered self can wait as long as it takes. The striving self was who I was before. High achiever, precise diagnostician, believer in the efficacy of evidence-based intervention delivered at the appropriate intervals. I was very good at striving. I had made a career out of it. I had built an entire identity out of it. And the moment the pain stopped, the moment I crossed, the moment I was somewhere else, the striving stopped with it. Not gradually, not as a chosen practice. It simply became impossible, because where I was, there was nothing left to strive toward. Everything had already arrived. That is what he gave me. That is what I came back carrying. Not a revelation in the sense of a document or a list of names or a detailed prophecy. A knowing. A knowing about what we are underneath the striving, what we find when the striving ends, and, this is the part I came back to say, the fact that we do not have to die to stop striving. That is what the crisis is costing us. Not that people are dying. People have always died. The crisis is that people are living in maximum effort at minimum life, for years, for decades, and no one is asking them the question that opens the door. I am asking it now. Through this channel, in this voice, in this format that I never would have imagined using before I died and came back, I am asking it. And here is what I want you to do with it. Think of one person. Not a crowd of people, not a category of people. One specific person, someone you can picture right now. Someone whose face comes to mind when I describe the barely bearable life. Someone you've been worrying about, or should have been worrying about. Someone who is technically fine and actually not. Write down this question. Write it on your phone, somewhere you can find it. When is the last time you told someone the true thing? That's it. That's the opening. Not a diagnosis, not an intervention, not a suggestion that they need help, which most people in that state have been told so many times it has ceased to mean anything. Just that question. Because if someone who loves you asks you the true thing question, with genuine curiosity and without an agenda, it changes the shape of the room. It opens something that medication cannot open. It reaches the place that barely bearable never touches. That is the conversation he showed me. That is what he said would matter. Not the prescription, not the diagnosis, not the system. The conversation between two people, one of whom has decided that the other person's invisible life is worth being curious about. If you know someone right now who is struggling, comment below. Tell me what they're carrying as much as you're comfortable sharing. I will read it. Sometimes just writing it down, just putting it in words outside your own head, is the beginning of the true thing. And if this reached you, if something in this landed in the place where you live, the one you don't usually mention, then you're already closer than you think. You don't have to have died to find what I found. I came back to tell you that. I came back to tell you it is real, and it is reachable, and you do not have to earn it by suffering long enough or striving hard enough or failing the right number of treatments. You just have to let someone ask the question. Subscribe if you haven't yet. This channel is going to keep telling these stories, because there are more of them than anyone is counting, and every single one of them is pointing at the same thing. Come back, bring someone with you, and write that question down.